Hey everyone, welcome back. Our next video is going to be about splines, one of my favorite things to use in 3D Max. Splines are a great tool that get overlooked quite a bit, especially when you're starting out. So let's talk about what splines are. So typically you're going to be working in your geometry menu, making 3D objects and stuff like that. But we're going to switch over to our shapes menu, and we're going to play around with some of the shapes in here. So let's just start with a line. Line is nice and simple. You just click where you want your line to be. If you just click, it'll make nice straight lines from point to point. You can click and drag to add a handle and add some nice curves. Right, and then it'll add another one. You can click and drag, keep adding handles. Nice thing is you don't really have to worry too much about what you're making. Really easy to edit these things out. So what I always recommend is just have some fun with it. Don't worry too much about what you're making at first, and just kind of get a general shape of what you're doing. I have no idea what I'm making here. I can continue it through and close it off to make a 2D shape. So I do that. So I hit J to get rid of my box extents there, because I hate them. I hit G to get rid of my grid too. So there you go, we have a nice 2D shape. So before we do some other fancy stuff with it, let's edit it. So let's say we're making something. It's generally the shape I want it to be, but it's not perfect. You can go to your Modify panel, and it's going to look somewhat similar to the Edit Poly panel. You can select your vertices here, and you can select each of these just as you would a regular vertice on a 3D object. And ones where you click and drag, you'll see you'll have handles on either side. If you switch over to your Move tool, hitting W, you can hover over one of these guys and move them along. You'll see they both adjust. You can move the actual point too if you just hover over your gizmo. So let's play around. Let's say I wanted to get some nice round shapes here. Right, whatever it is I'm making. And typically the rule with any sort of spline kind of work or this this kind of work here, do as few points as you can, right? Don't add too many. Right? If you started off and you're like, oh, I'm gonna add all the little detail to make all my edges, then you're just gonna have more points to adjust, and it's just gonna start looking all lumpy and shit. So don't do that. Do little points. There you go, bam. So let's say we made this this hard point here. It's nice corner point, but we want it to be nice and soft like this. Well, it's super easy. You can select a point, right click, and from here you can select the types of corners they are. So by default it's a corner. That's if you just click. These ones here that we had are Bezier, so if we switch it to that, what that'll do is it'll give you handles on either side, and if you move one, it's going to move the other one as well. So it's going to try and make as smooth of a curve as it can from the inputs that you're giving it. So those are super handy and can look pretty awesome. Now you can also switch them to back to corner if you want. You can do Bezier corner, which is nice. It'll keep that corner that you had, but put handles as well. So then you could do some really tight stuff like that, or rounds to sharp. Things that would otherwise be impossible to do with just a regular Bezier handle. So if you have to make some waves or something like that, it'd be sweet. And if you don't want to deal with handles at all, you can always just switch it to smooth. Smooth will just take your first point and your third point, and your second point will just kind of try and do its best to auto adjust. And obviously, sometimes it works fine. Sometimes, you start getting stuff like this. You're like, hey, what is this? I'm gonna have to go in here, adjust this. Still not really getting what I want, so I don't use smooth a lot. It's not that smooth. Sometimes it might work, sometimes it does not work at all. Most of the time. So there we go. Let's just get some nice sweet shapes here. Oh yeah, look at this. This is looking pretty great. Crazy thing. Let's maybe maybe you wanted to make like let's get out of here. Say I wanted to make some fire, like a fire pattern. Or something like that, or some waves, right? So let's do that. There we go. It's kind of okay. Not too worried about it, right? We got a little bit of a fire going on there. And then I go through and I adjust. All right. Switch this to Bezier corner. Alright, get right in there. Don't want to work too close because then I can't see whatever the hell I'm doing. Alright, so we do something like that. Alright, get some flames going on, whatever. This is okay. Alright, so we got our, you get our shape. Now what can we do with this? So you do a couple things. Number one is sometimes you might not get the smoothness that you want, so you could always go into your settings here, and under interpolation you can up this to get it nice and smooth. Now that will add how complex those shapes are when we do actually convert them over to either a 3D shape or other 2D shapes. So you still got to be careful not to put your interpolation up really high, and we'll see exactly what that does in a little bit. So now what can we do with this shape? Now, well, we could do something simple. We could use a modifier we didn't talk about in the last tutorial, and that's the Extrude Modifier. So if I click that on, and it'll put this modifier on here, and by default the amount's set to 0, but you can see it's already a 3D plane, and I can increase the amount and actually get some depth going up in here. And it's a nice little way just of making little, cardboard cutouts of things really quick, something that I would never want to box model. I could just kind of, add some nice detail. I could decide if I want to cap the tops and bottoms. How do I want to cap them and stuff like that. You could also decide what type of mesh it's going to be and all that. So, again, really nice way. I wanted to make some, some fire, grass, whatever 2D shape it is, right? Pretty simple. The nice thing is you can kind of go slightly 3D, but extrude doesn't work quite as nice if you start going on, some different axes. You'll see it starts not really understanding how to actually attach your verts together. So I don't recommend doing that too much. It can get really messy, but you can definitely do it. So a couple other cool things you could do. You notice I haven't collapsed this down to an editable poly or anything like that. I can, right? But then I won't have my sweet spline tools anymore. But now this is a polygon. I got all my edges here, right? Nice and simple. So let's undo that a little bit. So I'm going to leave my extrude on, but I'm going to go back to my line. And this little light bulb here by Extrude, I can turn that on and off if I want to just see what it's like. Now the cool thing about splines is that with this on, I can go to my line and I could just keep working at it. And I could have my edit or my extrude up on top, and I could still see what kind of 3D object this is turning out to be without having to go back and forth. I could just have it on all the time, which is really sweet. I really like that. I like doing this for things like windows and carvings and jazz like that. Works quite well. Now, a cool thing I can do, which probably won't make sense much with these flames, but sorry, sometimes I get really hung up on trying to make all my lines nice and smooth. The cool thing I can do with this, let's turn off extrude. Now, let's say for some reason I wanted a freaking hole in here. Now imagine if this was a 3D object. Trying to make a hole in here would just be a pain in the ass, right? Just trying to extrude that in, cut it out, whatever. So let's go back to my line. Let's turn off extrude for now. Let's go back to the creation menu and let's make ourselves a circle. Let's position that over here. Say we're making a piece of armor. This is where like a hinge is going or some sort of crazy device. I'm going to go back to my line. And in here I'm going to close down my interpolation. I'm going to select my attach, my little attach button here. I'm going to attach this circle to it. Now what's going to happen is when I turn my extrude back on, it's actually extruded that circle in there. So the cool thing about splines is it kind of goes every other object. So the most outside one is like the solid lines, then the next object I add will be hollow, and so on. And the cool thing is that I can still move this around because it's in the process of creating it. Now if you crisscross some lines, it won't understand what the hell you're trying to do and it'll just break. Right? If I have it outside, it'll be an object. So you kind of have to be careful where you put it. And I could even hold shift to duplicate this if I wanted more. I could scale this down. Alright, really cool, really awesome way of making, gears or some crazy ass stuff like that. Stuff that would just be a real pain in the butt to do otherwise. So that's really sweet. So extrude is nice because it's simple. You just kind of lets you see what you're doing. You could always take your line and just convert it to an editable poly. You'll just get a nice flat object. Now you'll see it's added some edges here to try and actually make sense of how these circles attach to this. but it doesn't attach any of these other things. This is just one really ugly face, so they're not very clean models, but you know, they work for kind of getting some stuff in there, especially if you're doing just high poly modeling and all that. One of the modifiers that I don't have in here, but you can use, is one called Bevel. And so what Bevel does is, it's like Extrude, but it lets you do a few things. So the first thing you can do is say, hey, how much do you want your first bevel to be? And I'm like, hey, maybe I want like a second bevel, so I could just do like a little one. And then I have an outline little input here, which will let me, you know, inset this stuff. So now I can start getting some nicer edges. Now you gotta be careful when too many verts come together. You can get some really weird looking stuff. All right. Oops. So you gotta kind of be careful how much you do that by. But it lets you, you know, at least get some nicer, higher detail objects going up in there without having to, you know, do some chamfering and stuff on your own after. So quite nice. And there's a whole bunch of crap you can take a look at in here if you want. You know, different kind of stuff. So that's kind of the first use of splines. Oh, excuse me. Nice flat objects, right? Really intricate shapes like these flames, right? If you're going to do, you know, electric stuff or different crazy bolts or whatever, nice to use some splines. So that's number one. Number two is let's talk about some pipes and wires and things like that. So you can use all these other shapes. It's all the same craziness as 3D objects. Just you know, you can use some springs and shit. Some cool stuff. Lines where it's at, though, it's pretty awesome. So now let's say we have some sort of factory and there's wires laying on the ground and stuff, right? So I'm going to go with my top viewport and just draw some wires. Just imagine these things are really long. You know, hey, these are curved on the ground, right? Whatever. Or let's say I needed some wires for, you know, hanging between buildings, whatever it happens to be, right? So say this is my wires laying on the ground. I'm gonna, you know, try and get these looking a little smoother. Right, whatever, they're wires, all depends how thick and tense they are, how smooth these lines can get. But you know, let's say I wanted, there you go, there's my wire, right? So this is just a 2D object, so it's not really a very good wire. But what you can do is if you go under rendering, you have two options. You have render in viewport and render in renderer. Since this is mainly game development stuff, render doesn't matter. But if I click render in viewport, it will turn this 2D object into a 3D shape. And it'll allow me to do a few things like adjust the thickness. So if I want a nice thick wire, how many sides, do I want it to be really high poly? The angle just lets you spin where the edges are. You can do a rectangular one too, which is pretty sweet for railings and certain things. But radial is pretty sweet. And so let's keep that on. And now we can take some of these dudes here and make this make a little bit of sense. So let's just curve that up like that. All right, we got to make sure that this wire is actually sitting on top of itself like that. All right, pretty awesome. All right, if it's getting too facety, I can go in and change the interpolation like I did last time. Oh yeah, there you go. Don't want to do it too much again. It'll get really high poly. So there you go, we have a nice wire. Now, my absolute favorite thing about splines, the reason why I wanted to do this little tutorial, is one simple button. And one simple thing is unwrapping things like wires and pipes is the worst garbage that's ever garbaged, and I hate it. But the nice thing about splines is they have this sweet button called Generate Mapping Coordinates. If you put that on, it'll just freaking unwrap them for you. So if I convert this to an editable poly, let's say it's done. I add a UVW modifier, which I have on a shortcut. I open it up. Let's open up my other viewport. Bam, look at that. Nice and straight. And it doesn't do the proportions quite perfectly sometimes, but honestly, for, you know, what it's doing here, this is the best. Alright, so let's throw a checker pattern on here. Alright, so kind of fit it to the square, which is kind of dumb, but it doesn't really matter. we go. Let's get that going. Look at that. Beautiful. It'd be a huge pain in the ass to unwrap this thing. I would never do it. I would rather have a game with no cables than ever to unwrap something squiggly like that. So anyways, super awesome, really cool thing about splines, auto unwrap. And that works for all of that stuff. Doesn't matter what you're doing with splines, they all got the generate mapping coordinates business on there, which is sweet. Same goes for pipes. If you're going to make a kit of pipes, just go to your top viewport or front viewport. You know, let's make some. We'll go over some of the more intricate things under the pipe creation. So let's make some. Do this. Maybe do. If you hold Shift, it'll make 90-degree angles for you. Right. So let's say we're doing a pipe like this. So let's go in here, make it nice and thick. Alright, we got some sweet pipes going on. Oh, that's craziness. Alright, maybe let's add a little bit of, actually, you know what, let's just do one 90-degree just to kind of illustrate what I want to do. So a couple cool things you have with pipes in here that we didn't go over last time. So again, we have our generate mapping coordinates, you have your steps for your interpolation. Let's talk about the actual geometry because there's some really nice features in here. I don't know why I have this open as 3. So number 1, you can create lines. So from here, if you want to add some more lines, you totally can. You could break, you can attach multiple, same kind of deal. You can refine. Refine is super awesome. You go in here. I'm going to hit F3 just to go into wireframe mode. With refine, I could just add vertices along here. All right. So if I ever wanted to do that. And the really cool thing about splines is I could just delete them, hitting the delete button, and it'll just go back to normal because these are just points. It's interpolating all this stuff as we go. So it's really, really nice. We have weld, you know, connect, all this kind of jazz. Same stuff as edit poly. If you guys don't know what that is, you can figure it out just by having some fun. But the two really awesome things about splines are the fillet or fillet, depending on how you say it. Now what that will do is, actually, you know what, let's not talk about that one at first. Let's talk about chamfer. Chamfer is a simple one. You can select a vertice, and you can either play with the numbers here, or you get this little tool as long as chamfer's on. And you'll see there's like this arrow with like a white thing on there, and you can click and drag over your verts, and it'll just chamfer them. It'll add a nice 45-degree angle, because it's the halfway mark between the 90. So you add some nice corner angles in there if you wanted to. Now my favorite thing though is this button right here. I'm going to select it and I'm going to click and drag, and what it's going to do is it's going to add a nice 90-degree curve to my my pipe here, whatever it is I'm making. So smooth, right? It is amazing. And I could add, you know, a little one or like a big one, and there's like the numbers on the side if you want to play with those. So really, really awesome. Best thing for making pipes and stuff like that. And again, all auto unwrapped, which is really, really great. Okay, so that's kind of the real basics of splines. You know, there's definitely other stuff you could learn about them. All this stuff, you know, rectangle, it's all just kind of getting you off the ground. Check it out, you make an egg. Yeah, I don't know. I've never used the egg thing before. It's crazy. And all that. So one more thing I'm going to show you guys. I guess maybe 2 more things. Let's talk about 2 more things. All right, let's get rid of this thing. All right, so let's go in here. I'm going to turn off my rendered and viewport. So let's do a couple things. Number 1, what we're going to do is we're going to make another squiggly line. All right, and then we're going to make ourselves a star. Now, you know, making pipes that are round or rectangle is all well and good, but what if I wanted a pipe that was a star? That would be pretty friggin' sweet. Well, we can do that. We can loft along any sort of line with another shape. So let's take a look how we do that. It's a little, it's in a bit of a strange place, but if you go into 3D Max, excuse me, you go under your geometry. Instead of going under standard primitives, go under compound objects. There's a sweet little tool called Loft. And I have my line selected here. And with Loft, you have 2 options. In the beginning, you get path or get shape. Since I already have my path, I'm going to click get shape, and I click my star. And what it's done is it's taken my star and it's run it along the path of this spline, allowing me to have a 3D object in the shape of this spline. Now the cool thing is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is that this is still linked together. So I could still edit my original star and without having to mess around with this. And it'll keep lofting it along this spline until I convert it to an editable poly or do something else. Now, we do another couple cool things. There's some surface properties and jazz in here too. Sweet generate mapping IDs and coordinates and things in here as well. So let's do one more thing. Now let's say I'm going to go back to my 2D spline tool. I'm going to make whatever, just like a rectangle. Now let's say I wanted to have this loft. I'm going to select my loft, go to the modify panel because now my loft is in here. Now let's say I wanted to have this object start as a star but end as a square for some freaking reason. I can totally do that too. Under the path parameters under a loft, you have your path here, you'll see. It's done by distance, so this is 0 to 100%. I can crank this to 100%. Get shape, select my square, and now my spline will try its best to convert itself from a star to a square. And it does some really crazy ass shit there, but let's see if we can, yeah, we tried doing a patch. Yeah, that kind of looks a little better. Depends on what you want. You mesh. So it'll try its best. Obviously, when it's a really, like, two very different shapes, it may not do as great. But that's awesome. And then the other cool thing is, if I move this out of the way, I still have my spline. And these are all 3, 4 separate objects, so I could still go in here and adjust this and get what I want, you know, without having to affect that one. So I can go in here, adjust my interpolation. Oh, that might be in the surface, actually, sorry. Ignore that. So I could do that, right? And you could add as many shapes to this loft as you like. So you can do, you know, however many things. You can even do, you know, just pick a shape from there. Right? You could do it at 50%. So if I wanted to do 50%, and then it's also a square, and then it finally starts converting to a star, I could totally do that. So you definitely have some, you know, you could do the different shapes and stuff. You can select a shape, so if you want to select this or select this, and then you can oh, that's the snap. You can snap that on. Sorry, there was a way to move these. Oh yeah, I got pick shape. I don't remember how to do it, but there was definitely a way to move it around. You could optimize shapes if you want to optimize them down. Right, you play around with some of these settings on kind of the best look that you want. You flip some normals. Alright, you can do some quad sides or not quad sides. It's trying its best to do quads, but then it kind of freaks out over here. So yeah, you know, kind of play around with it, figure out what you want, right? This kind of decides how many steps, how many path steps, if you want it nice and smooth. That's what I was trying to do with the interpolation before. So pretty weird kind of tool, but hey, you never know when it comes in handy, especially when you're doing high poly stuff and you want to do some cool wires coming out of a robot, turning from, you know, hexagons to squares or whatever crazy shit. Oh, sorry about that. My office building has an alarm that turns on at 10, freaks the hell out of me every single time. Anyways, okay, so that's that, and we'll look at one last thing here. So let's get rid of this. Let's go to front viewport. Let's get ourselves a spline again. Let's make ourselves, you know, whatever, this thing here. The last thing we can do is we can lathe objects as well. So much like making a baseball bat or working on clay pottery on a wheel, we can take a simple object and just spin it around an axis and make it 3D. So you can go into here, and I have a lathe modifier. This one's a modifier, so I'm going to take my spline, I'm going to click lathe, and what it's going to do is going to take the pivot that I have originally and just try and spin this sucker right around that. So I can select lathe and I can move around where this pivot is. So I can make a jug. I can flip normals and stuff in here too, in case it decides to do that differently. I can make myself a jug, or if I take this lathe and I flip it the other way. Which way? Let's flip some normals. Let's go back to the front viewport or left viewport. Oh, front viewport. Alright, I can make myself like a some sort of sweet, you know, cup of some kind. So you kind of decide what you want to do, right? You can use some mid, max, center. It kind of tries to figure out a good place for these guys. But really nice way of just making, you know, phases, baseball bats, simple, you know, typical kind of lathing stuff. And like always, nice thing, you can always go back to here. I guess it doesn't like that for some reason. You can still adjust all this stuff. Right? Go back up to lathe, check it out. You know, and then we can do like, hey, let's get this guy. Right. Let's lathe right across that so it's closed off. Right, so then you can do some fancy stuff. Right, you use your refine. So maybe like add like a lip over here. There we go. I'm not doing a very good job making this thing look interesting, but I don't care. For tutorialness, it's okay. I might even delete that and just kind of work with, again, remember less handles, the better. You might get some better results. So keep your life nice and simple, right? All right, there we go. Look at that. Bam, we got some craziness going on in there. All right, you can decide which direction it goes as well. So if you want to have it spin sideways. All right, different kinds of jugs, different sizes. I don't know why it's doing this crazy thing over here. Probably because, oh yeah, look at that craziness. That's not good. Let's turn that into a regular Bezier, so I'm not doing any crazy shit like that, because that looks dumb. This can be a Bezier corner, and I can take this guy here and just maybe make him a little harder edge. Alright, whatever. This is a stupid pot. Let's do Bezier corner on this as well. There we go. Whatever. It's a stupid pot. Let's do smooth. Let's do Bezier. Sometimes I like to just reset these things because they freak out. They look kind of funky sometimes. Anyways, whatever. Good enough. Alright, we got our lathe. We've lathed the hell out of this thing. Alright, maybe we want to add some how many sides, so you can add how many segments. Alright, convert this puppy to a edible poly. Throw a shell on there. Look at that shit. Now we got an inside bit. Bam. Phased. Cool. So that's lathing. Again, you can do whatever you want with it. Baseball bats, typical lathe kind of things. Goblets. Everybody loves a good goblet. Cool. So that's that. Hope you enjoyed this quick and dirty spline tutorial. Again, there's lots more to splines. I just want to get you through the basics, and hopefully that's all right. Thanks, guys.